I'm going to show you how to make a bar graph of your data from the worm lab. So when you come into your lab report, put your cursor in the right spot under graph, go to Insert, Chart, and choose Column Graph. That's going to make what we would usually call a bar graph. So it inserts this random graph, and now we need to change the data so that it has the right data for our lab. Click on the graph, click this arrow button, and that will open the spreadsheet that goes with the data. So if I think a little bit about what I want my final graph to look like, I can decide which numbers to change and what words to change and make it look exactly how I want it to. So right now there's 4 teams along the bottom and it tells you how many points they scored in period 1 and period 2. I only want 2 bars because I'm only comparing 2 sites where I sampled worms. So for my data, I'm going to compare the construction site and the wetland. So I think I want those to be along the bottom, so I have a bar for each of those. So I will just replace these words up here. Construction site and wetland. That's what I actually compared. You get rid of team 3 and team 4. Let's see how it's coming. It's looking more like I want it to look. I want to get rid of these bars. I only want 1 bar for each of the sites that I sampled, so I can get rid of all of these numbers, since that's all the dark blue ones. And I can get rid of these 2 numbers, since those are the 2 bars that don't have a label anymore. And now I have 2 places for bars, so it's looking better. I should label this average number of worms, since that's what my numbers actually are, and put my actual numbers in. So I'm just going to make up numbers. Let's say I had 15 average number of worms in the construction site and 22 worms on average in the wetland. Okay, now my bar graph has all my data. Obviously it needs titles for the axes. It needs a new title here. So we need to customize the graph. The way we do that is click on the graph, click on these 3 little dots, and then click Edit Chart. That brings up a menu over here. And if I click Customize, this will give me all the options of what I can change on my graph. So first I would like to add a chart title and axis titles. I'm going to give it a nice descriptive title. So a bad graph title would be something like Worm Lab Graph. A bad graph title to make it more descriptive. Comparison of worm populations in 2 locations at Edina High School. That's a very descriptive graph title. It tells me exactly what this graph is about. So I want to see really good graph titles like that. If you accidentally click out of the menu, you can go back into it with those 3 dots. So let's do the axis titles now. Horizontal axis title, that's my x-axis. I'm going to call that types of habitat. That is a description of kind of generally what this is about. And my vertical axis is my y-axis. That's the average number of worms. So we have axis titles now. We have a graph title. Getting closer. I'm going to close that. I want to make this legend go away because it's kind of redundant with the y-axis. So if we open legend and click under position, choose none, and that goes away. And the last thing I want to do is rescale the y-axis, because right now it looks like there is like 8 times more worms in the wetland than in the construction site. But I know from looking at these numbers that that's not true, because 22 is not really that much more than 15. So we need to change the numbers over here, and we need to make it so that it goes to 0 at the bottom instead of just going to 14 at the bottom. So I can either click the vertical axis menu here, or I can just click on the box on the graph and that'll bring it up as well. I want you to set your minimum value to 0. Everyone needs to do that on their graph, and then that's going to make these bars a lot more realistic representation of this data. So I think my graph looks good. I'm going to go back to my lab report. Now there's a button here that says update. So I click that, and there it is. So my graph is looking good. If I close this and then I go home and I want to change something else, you can always go back in, open it again, change whatever you want to change, and then it will give you that update button again. So you can keep updating it, and you can always access this data. I'm going to delete the instructions, resize it so it just looks nice and it's exactly where I want it to be. And that is how you make your graph.